Josh Corey, our first reader tonight, our first opening act, is a poet, critic, translator, and novelist who likes to relax with the occasional sparring session. And I mean with real gloves. Okay? Or Dungeons and Dragons game. I love him already. He lives in Evanston, Illinois with his wife and daughter. Is a professor of English at Lake Forest College. He's the author of way too many books, right? Including a collection of essays from Mad Hat and several books of poetry and fiction as well. And his books will be available on the third floor of the Bingham Humanities Center for purchase tomorrow. So, Joshua.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark. Oh, wow. Hi. Amplification. And thank you to Mad Hat and, of course, to Michael and Leah. It's a great honor to be reading. And I'm going to read from my Mad Hat poetry mask, Hannah and the Master, which Michael has said some very kind things about to me tonight. Blushing over here. This is a book that was inspired by the notorious love affair between Hannah Arendt and Martin Heidegger. You may recall that one of those two people was a Nazi, and the other one was a Jew. But, spice of life and all that. In the book, Arendt and Heidegger kind of are reborn in our parlous century and reenact some of their danse macabre as Blade Runner-style replicants of themselves. I think I've said enough. I'm just going to read 4 little pieces, and the first one is called The Annulments of Hannah R. The emigrant as pariah is replicant to herself. Explain the difference between fiction and nonfiction, between poem and prayer. Hannah did not past girlhood say the Kol Nidra. She read Marx and Darwin. She wrote poems. She did not kneel or daven these poems, or say or whisper them out loud. She wrote them in her careful schoolgirl's script and folded them and sealed them and passed them to the master, who read them in his office with the door closed under the electric light. Outside, the world was smoldering, though they did not then know it. Maybe he never knew. The seasons become trapezoidal, then a jitterbugging line. Winter stays too long or comes too late. Out in the night of the sea, the fish are slowly going crazy. The white bones of reefs. What color is coral when coral is no longer red? By the authority of the court on high and the authority of the court down here, by the permission of the one who is everywhere, and by the permission of this congregation, we hold it lawful to pray with sinners. When was the Last Supper? When did she last cover her eyes before 2 candles, the paradoxical blinding that permits the brightness of the bride to enter? Berlin, Marburg, Paris, New York, occupied territories. Kol Nidra, not Hebrew, not a prayer, but a clearing. Twinned wicks divide the healed place from the place of wounding, where the world lives. She opens her eyes. The new landscape's public, incomprehensible, laid waste, a moonscape, a shadow overrun with deer ticks and Ebola and bark beetles and kudzu vine, the wild counterlife of the present, the shadow of the lovers, the light of the world. He is the mountain, the forest, the columbine. She is the plain, the flatland, the human jungle, the desert city. They cannot understand one another. The Shema is no prayer, but a call that assembles the community and instructs it on its basis, the one. There are many shards, many folds, fewer ears to hear. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. The human artifice, Hannah R. What she wills instead that the lovers stand, mistress of return, balas teshuvah, return to the land that is your soul. But is it soul or land that makes metaphor? That the lovers stand and turn to face one another, their gazes crossing over the burnt and empty districts. That words might mark out those spaces, even confused and whirling words, even rage, as though the course of nature which wills that all fire burn to ashes is reverted, and even dust can burst into flames. That in that space for words and rage, hands might gesture, pointing to eyes and mouths, up to the sky, down to the brutalized earth, the green place inside us. That the earth of many mothers, burnt by the solar eagle, might love us again. That this burning earth should turn on our world's end basis, Thalata Thalata, the sea's epic theater. What is only commentary, and what is food? The century at the bottom of that sea. Gaia Noir, the open, the open. What's gone missing? The calibrator curled in on himself like a sleeping viper. The gods dancing between the atoms, kicking fruitlessly. The poet, beaten and left for dead behind the bar, drags himself out of the alley, up the street, up the stairs, and falls into the room that is his. He will live. He will live. The poet in the 40s, in the 70s, it's okay with me. The naked girls next door dancing on Pangea's grave. Hopeless hope, a word to come in the heart of thought. We're physical. Elided the century to come, it's Gaiagony. If the earth is alive, the earth is angry, and the sky is the skin of the earth, crawling toward us on its hands. But the wave comes unseen and unanswered. You Greeks, must we die to be here? Last part. Intense, inane. If the world dies to itself, her figure tumbling on the diagonal through infinite space, like Blake's Rahab embracing the dragon of her thought to awake the prisoners of death. Sardonic, straightening her skirt, cigarette intact, trail of smoke. Animals in the void, giraffes, zoophytes, badgers, every shade of ant. Birds plummet too, and honeybees in their fatal cloud of neonicotinoids. The flying ones all gone. The oceans in free fall, the fish and cephalopods aware as we, the corals visible, tumble into whiteness. The dead falling with us, and the stars, don't be fooled by their icily distant regard. They're falling too. Bodies fall, and with each of them memories making space out of time. My body remembers my father's body in its madness, remembers fathers and fathers, mothers and mothers, remembers Isaac and Rebekah and Abraham and Sarah, remembers Lucy in her Pleistocene cave in falling Ethiopia. It still can startle the phenotype, Irish faces, Ashkenazi faces, pushing through flesh. Heavy German, heavy as Goethe, ringing metal, the accents. Ancient, the agency of the earth that finds us here, finds us out in the imperial void. Do you imagine that evolution ends with you? Hannah, crossed legs encased in posthumous stockings, smoking and thinking. Only the living can be strangers. You and me and the void makes three. The threefolds kiss? Forms of life, forms of fire. Forms of fire. Thank you.
Leah Graham is the author of 2 poetry collections, From the Hotel Vernon and Hoch and Helix and Where and Here and You. She's published as well a fine press book, Murmurations, and 3 chapbooks. She is an associate professor at Marist College in Poughkeepsie. And most recently, and I'm sure most proudly and in some ways most relevantly, right, she is the editor of a wonderful anthology of critical essays on Michael Anania. It's called From the Word to the Place, the work of Michael Anania. It's published by Mad Hat Press, of course, and copies are available at the book table. Right? Yeah. Leah.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Boggs. Okay, so first, From the Word to the Place, you can get it back there, $20, folks. What a deal. It's got Archambault. It's got Scroggins. It's got Celia Bland, who...
Good things, too.
It's got a lot of great people. Anyway, if you don't have the cash now, there are postcards and you can order. So please check it out. Okay, so I'm going to read poems that mostly have to do with Michael Anania tonight. How's that? So I'm going to start with my chapbook, what I call, the Canadians are going to kill me, but my macaroni and glue chapbook from Above, but I love them anyway, Above Ground Press, Spell to Spell, which is part of an ongoing manuscript, the OED Odes, that deal with individual words. And this first poem is dedicated to Michael. And I have to say this thing because otherwise I'm going to be embarrassed and he's going to be, everyone will be embarrassed. But anyway, so when I was his student, and we all know Michael has this wonderful gap in his teeth, right? When I was a student, somehow it came up, but it came up more than once in all those years, that in the tale, the Chaucer's tale, The Wife of Bath, that the gap in the teeth was a sign of randiness. And that stuck with me, all right? And so, but also, so this, along with the fact that we would be sitting at USC, that brutalist architecture, those of you who are from Chicago or know what I'm talking about, or will know this. And he would say during our classes, "This is dazzling." And that word, right, the way he would say it, and then also that gap, like everything would just like shine. It was like Aphrodite walked into the room. You know what I mean? Like it was just like awesome. So anyway, so as I started to do this work on individual words, dazzling got to be one of those words. So here it is, dazzling for Michael Anania. That was Chicago then. We sat around a table like other grad students all over the country discussing language's coagulation into the graduating gloam. Ashbury's convex mirror, McGrath's letter to an imaginary friend, Levertov's evening train. Pigeons cooed and shat those brutalist ledges, the bulletproof windows, stairwells stunk of not-so-secret smokers. The Eisenhower rushed the roar to screech of the Blue Line, Greektown's Opa. In flames just north, goat carcasses in wood smoke and vacancies pocked the south. Speak softly, love, floating from an open door just off Taylor Street. Dazzling. It was how he said it. Daz stretched the mouth wide as a marquee, showcased that gap between his front teeth, a sign of randiness, if Chaucer is believed, alluring in Theos for the poem. made you think back to those years the stroll hopped when Satchmo joined King Oliver, arrived Central Station in his hick pants and white socks, a real rube all the way from New Orleans come to play. Or Dorothy in her pinafore before Emerald Oz bombs vision of shy. Forget the burned inner thigh, the asbestos snow job. A sweet blinding, stealing us, a scintilla, a sound. I'll read another from this collection, which is dedicated to Catherine Casper, who was also a student of Michael's, and also just a really good colleague, you know, in memoriam. Widdershins, noun, counterclockwise, to do anything backwards. Kind of the story of my life. All right. For Catherine Casper, in memoriam. And the epigraph comes from Robert Duncan. There is the hero who struggles east, Widdershins to free the dawn. He must struggle alone toward the pyres of day. 1. I woke up yesterday thinking Wonder Twins, that old cartoon in which the heroes are brother and sister with rings that when pressed together turn them into weight of an iceberg, speed of an eagle. The twins' talent for solutions was never obvious. No primary gift of flight or fin, no magic lasso or gadget. Protean, the slipperiness of gods. 2. When we used to spin in summer yards, we learned we could change the world by dizzying ourselves. Early intoxication in movement. Blue rush, then green, collapsing self to place, laughter to centrifuge of sky, dervishes of the lawn, before knowledge, before thought. 3. Turn turtle, what British sailors called capsized ships. Anything flipped upside down, topsy-turvy, arcy-versy, inverted, retains the profane, connotes confusion, the root meaning of awkward in Old English. Now, what the kids name the new cool. I wrote this a few years ago. I don't think they say that anymore. 4. Those giant tortoises could live on their backs a year without food below in the holds while at sea. Shells that floated them through the Humboldt from mainland to island, century to century, turned them water and oil and soup. You know, I'm going to read one more out of this. Simply because a few years ago when Archambault roped me into doing a paper on Bill Knott. You remember that? Yeah, that was fun. Anyway, I wrote this poem here, and so it just is like this, it's kind of silly, but I don't know, I still like this poem called Bounty of the Free World. It was in my most like I hate Trump moment. Anyway, Bounty of the Free World. My mother calls him P-Mert because she says she refuses to say his name again. His name, she says, a name she hears which feels here all the time, seems in the air, in her ear, she says everywhere, and so renames him in reverse. A tick, soft con, or kid's trick, like when we used to fall for spelling GIP backwards every time, turns him like a clock. Widdershinning that Fifth Avenue tower, undoing the spell of time and place and lack, retracts name's power. My mother names him armless, superfluous, a swaggerless rapper whose rhymes are brands, whose brands are witless innuendo, a nip, a flash, the status quo easy mark, quick trip, come and goes, hot dogs sweating under heat lamps, bacon air deodorizers, penny pools, and platitudes on plaques on koozies or caps. Keep calm and carry on. I don't get drunk, I get awesome. A mechanical catfish singing above the register, bad to the bone. Okay, I'm just going to read a couple more. Again, going back to Michael Ananiah. Let's see. Okay, the first one I'm going to read. So I don't read this very often because, well, you'll imagine because it's Bachelard. So this book from the Hotel Vernon is about a hotel that was built in 1900 in Worcester, Massachusetts, with a long, old, interesting history. I bartended there for about 3 months before I basically wrote a note like, I quit, I gotta go, you know, it was one of those places. But really interesting. And so when I was there, they kept giving me these day shifts, and because people were crazy, that I would start to clean the bar just to get away and not have to talk to everyone. And so one day I found a list of scratched patrons behind the bar, you know, behind the register, that was just so interesting. And so I was actually thinking about Michael's poem. Michael, you're going to have to jog my memory here, the name of the poem, but he uses all these proper names next to other objects, as if the names themselves are like, you know, museum pieces or something. And so that was kind of in the back of my head, and I was rereading Bachelard's, you know, Poetics of Space, because I was trying to think about the space of the bar and where I was and that sort of thing. Anyway, so you're going to hear some of the names of these people that were scratched. That's it, those of you who are not from Massachusetts or that part of the Northeast, anyway, banned, right? But also you'll hear a bunch of Bachelard here. So this is called Poetics of the Scratched Patron, and it's for Garen Cycle, who should be here, by the way, who's a wonderful poet and also part of the anthology for Michael. If Matthew O'Leary called 911, a universe withdrawn to corners, miniaturizing, or what bears the mark of infinity, Lana, do you wanna? Always in our daydreams, the house protects the dreamer for dealing in the John Ritchie, this cosmos of the half-open, how we take root day after day in a corner of the world, Carol No Teeth, before outspread fields and daring Lisa B. the leech to daring associations. Round cries bum Tommy of round being, alive contradictions accumulate. Bobby, serve at your own risks. Intimacy or imagined as a vertical being with increased intensity. Doyle, the fat one, subject to dispersions. The mind loses Big Jug's genie, its geometric homeland. None other CC and hang of a wine deep sea. Larry and Steve, the human Ferris wheel, imagining degrees in unity. Or Nellie the cannoli, fighting Johnny Mumbles under the sky's cupola. This curdled quiet trembles before Al's buddy Damien, sensing a square stability, or what depth these echoes, giant Tony, seems memory's refuge. The simpler the image, Georgie, forswearing at bartenders, the vaster this dream. Recall songs, charms, pure threshold. Whoops, pure threshold, there you go. All right, the last one that I'll read here, because it actually, I love this. It actually mentions, not only does it mention Michael just outright, but this is so cool. So as I don't know if I'd finished the book or not, but Michael's in Austin, and his liquor store gal, Sue, is from Worcester. and Worcester, by the way, has all these nicknames. I mean, this is in the book too, but one of the nicknames that my Clark University students loved the best was the Woo. So Sue from the Woo. Anyway, so they both appear here. But this poem, actually, this book sort of spawned my next, the project I'm working on with all these words. And so the title of this poem is Namekuth. It's an obsolete word, known by name, well-known, famous, notorious, rare. Let's say Maurice the Pants Man, or Zudi's Goodnight Cafe, what used to be Old Billy's Lounge, now charred on Mulberry Street, down from what was once Stony O'Brien's, where your Gram used to sit with her boyfriends into her 60s, drinking gin and giving you and your brother and sister quarters for the jukebox, now called Nick's, because Vincent and Nicole are so in love, says Captain Bob. Let's say the Greyhound. That used to be Rafferty's, and before that a name I can't pronounce in Gaelic, and where they say the baker was blown and shat that girl, and I wonder which corner or John, and how much stench that place, that dark place where we all go to watch the World Cup with Richie Scales, Ali Bombs, bells and whistles. Everyone, you tell me, has another name or several better known than their own. Giant Jesus and Baby Jesus, Husky J and Bakery Joe, Trojan Mick and Pac-Man Pat, Lord Pork, Fat Ron, Polish Stosh, and the Warrior. Even in Texas, Michael mentions the Vernon to Sue, his liquor store gal from the Woo, who gives him the 1,000-mile stare. She says, bucket of blood, and we were told to look away, cross ourselves in the street when passing that place. Thanks so much.
That was great.
A few things, Leah. I'm not exactly sure what a liquor store gal is. Secondly, I did not know that Michael had one. And third, Archambault is interested in knowing how one might be acquired. That's all. Okay, Michael Anania. Have you heard his name before? Michael Anania's most recent collections are Continuous Showings and Night Songs and Clamors, both from Mad Hat Press, both available at the book table. And I'm sure he would be delighted to inscribe a copy for you afterwards, just as he would be delighted to inscribe a copy of From the Word to the Place, right? These are but the latest in a long line of books stretching back to The Color of Dust, published in 1970, a previous millennium, and which include the autobiographical novel The Red Menace and the essays collected in Plain Sight, Obsessions, Morals, and Domestic Laughter. Now, I've known Michael's poetry for a long time, but I regret, just as a matter of personal pleasure, that I waited until I think 2017, was it, to meet him in person at, of all god-awful things, an AWP reading. Yeah. Yeah, he is a delightful raconteur. But, you know, many of us can talk, especially when the liquor sets the tongue free. Please tip your bartender. There's a cash bar. What sets Michael apart from so many other poets is his eye and his ear. He sees, he observes, and he listens and he gathers from the noises in the air about him a music for his poems, sometimes classically contained, delightfully Schubertian, sometimes dissonant and angular, where overheard voices overlap and coalesce like a bagatelle of Webern's, sometimes improvisatorily jazzy and idioms evoking the concise melodic statements of Bixby-Becker or the fluid, endless runs of Charlie Parker. His is a poetry of the eye and of the mind, but most importantly, a poetry of the ear, a poetry to be heard. And now we get to hear some. So I'd like to, Michael Ananias.
Thank you. I understand we have this room until 1 o'clock.
We do indeed.
So I figure I'll last about that long. There was some conversation today about poetry and place, and I always like to read something from early in my life and then something late. And this is a poem called On the Conditions of Place. It begins with Propertius, who went to the opening of the temple of Apollo, which was dedicated by Augustus, and he was therefore late to Cynthia, and so the poem begins, you ask where I'm late. Loitered, you might say, at the edges of the ceremony, the golden colonnade, rig-streaked yellow marble, cattle so real they seemed to graze upon the stone, the god himself, flowing robes, and Augustus talking of Actaeon, the honorable dead. Love, things weigh on us. Certain occasions, the gods in their auspicious moments, men of state. Think of the crowd sun on the sun's bright counterfeit, woe and wonder shifting from point to point, like a flight of birds unfurling, turning shut, then opening again. I saw you once at the window, twisting a strand of hair around your finger, sunlight curling inward to your touch. Poplars in the wind, white underleaves like sea flowers, lines of foam, bright wings, and sails in rough weather. Bid them all fly, be gone. Sometimes it seems that more has been lost than ever remains, that we live in a slow passing among indecipherable signs, strangest and charm, the numbered particles of weight and light spin out the patterns matter takes. All that we know is consequence, hand, hair, moist skin, leaf curl, the day. As indistinct as water is in water, places dissolve into places, words among words. What is carried along, names whose sense shapes our memory, all that is said of what might be said, palatine or plat, a leaf, a stem, a proper noun, a spit curl of scum that draws along a moving stream, the probable line of what is seen. And then I'll move forward a bit. This, because it turned up in Leah's poem, is a poem called Chinatown. It was written for my friend Bill Russo, the great jazz composer and orchestrator who orchestrated a great deal of Stan Kenton. And it's called Chinatown. It's how they said it, like Tangerine or Cherokee. In Bridgeport, that is, Chinatown. Where are you from? Meaning, what neighborhood, what street corner? Chinatown. A privilege more certain than Taylor Street, deeper perhaps by misdirection, not Chinese in any sense, not Chinatown proper, really adjacent to it, but meaning something else altogether, a special sense not of place, but of value, value acquired in place, acquiring place, as in Chinatown. Chinatown was where all the real mafioso lived. They didn't live in Bridgeport. They lived in this little space around 26th Street, just south of Chinatown. Anyway, today I didn't know what to read, but I noticed that there is a building on the Louisville campus called Gottschalk. And that named for the great American composer Louis Maura Gottschalk. So I'm going to read Tintindale, in which Gottschalk appears. Tintindale was a piece done in 1947 by Dizzy Gillespie and Shadow Paso, the great timidist from Cuba. And the poem has to do with how Afro-Cuban music came into America over time. So it's called Tintindale. Oh, Ache is a word from the Santeria, which means the human spirit. It's the central energy of the world. Ache, not so much in the beat as in the space, the silence, not quite silence, memory and anticipation between one beat and the next, the air above the drum skin dizzy in tropic light. Move this way, it says, hips and arms in flight, heel and toe earthbound. What sunlight teaches is darkness, darkness light, sepal and whispering, Tintindeo, Tumbadorus, there in syllable and song, Habanero, Estrella, turning. Gottschalk in Havana in 1854 heard it, spent months carefully noting the rests in the score for A Night in the Tropics. Nearly 600 instruments sound like dense foliage, banana tree and plumeria, and silences etched into the music, beat, moist skin and leaf's edge, light and shadow, the way hips move beneath the bundle balanced on her head, the dirt track uneven, grace and purpose, swing implies dance, estrellita, the little turn pauses and turns again. Stars above the sea's tumult turn in the night sky, slow dancing, palm fronds thrash and thrash at the salt wind, swing over the waves, steady lift and fall. Kelp lines in the sand and brief phosphorus, tropic air tinged as always with decay. Kiss, did you say? The word merely or the act, breath's other beat and rest, the tongue sway, samba, double and triple, the hoard behind the brush of finger and palm, the drumhead pulled taut, her abdomen tight as a melon, she says. Try it. Oh. This is a series of poems about jazz. I moved to Texas after being in Chicago for 40 plus years. And I decided I should probably do in Texas what I had done in Nebraska and New York and study the history, agronomy, geology of the place. And I realized I was too old to do that again. But what I discovered is that I was listening to jazz music in Texas. So this series of poems called Morning Jam is about that. There was a jazz disc jockey in Houston who had a series of programs called Jazz for Breakfast or something like that. So I turned it into morning jazz, and it's just a series of jazz things. I have to say, because you're also ridiculously young, that in the beginning of this poem about Ray Brown, the great bass player, that it basically refers to Joe Hill, the great wobbly organizer who was killed early on. So there's this song, I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last. Oh, there's a nod. Oh, Norman, how see you? How good to see you. I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night. So this is the morning, this is called Tuesday morning. I dreamed I saw Ray Brown last night. The fingers of his right hand as light-filled as pin feathers in flight. His left hand measuring out the limestone fissured strata of sound, one note after another, landscape and song, entirely coincident. In the same series, a piece called Blue Again. Wednesday morning, it's miles again, this time in Texas. The Gulf clouds, dense gray, running westward. Flamenco sketched in rubblestone, not as a dancer moves, quick and equestrian, but as a hand moving line by line across paper, the soft sounds of graphite and silver point catching broken random fibers. Coltrane, Evans, the dancer poised as though of memory. And the Thursday's Child. These are all jazz pieces. The intricate work of live oak trees in sunlight, one hard-edged shade after another. Branches shagged with pale green moss, random play within a limited field, then leaf cluster, light, shade, shadow, and act, wave and particle. John Lewis and Mike and Milt Jackson, morning places you at such infinitesimal distances from consequence. Precision seems the natural way things choose to be ordered. Touch the table edge as though it too were an instrument. Cup, glass, bowl, and spoon. A single blueberry stem etched like punctuation into the saucer's pale rim. Leaves, as I said, and branches. And this is called At Least. Voices Beyond the Wall, Spanish probably. The cast of Morning Shadows, Friday, white vinca blossoming cannas, Stan Getz drawing out one silk thread after another. Its cloth fallen into bright remnants, Oscar Peterson and J.J. Johnson, the Opera House in September, its arcades suddenly aeolian, the dark river flecked with city lights, Harry Callahan's collage, Chicago 1957, pieces not quite joined, somehow everything you imagine, Jesus Flores and his blue Mercury hardtop, the London House, Eleanor on the damp slope of the Polk Street Bridge. Is it Yesterday's already? Yesterday's the last song on that album. And Saturday, this is the last one, Saturday in Turn. Ruby-throated this morning's hummingbird, trembling at the yellow hibiscus, a cartoon quarter note just played. Coltrane and Monk at the 5 spot in 1957, New York's ruby aflame and spinning past the subway stairs, 8th Street, the city's dank underground breath, rippling her skirt, her high heels spiking the damp pavement, Shadow Wilson and Wilbur Ware, heel tap on the taut seams of her figured stockings. My dear, someone said, as though in passing as much breath and touch as speech. And let's see. It's not quite one, is it?
No, not quite.
Okay. Well, for Alden, this piece of Omaha. This is the title poem from Night Songs and Clamors, and I'll read just the first couple of them. So, night songs and clamors. And if I tried and did try, there was still no code I can find in the sound of the brittle leaves. The live oaks are dropping this March night. A rasp not quite like breath or song, a kind of absence billed from loss. A game, perhaps, we hide and seek, press our faces toward sleep, the day still hissing in our ears. A drop forge, its rhythms beat out the long night's labor. The flash at the die's edge, its remnant dawn chipped away, beam crate and gantry. Between 4 and 4:05 a.m., the clock slows and slows. I wish I may, I wish I'd see the sun streak the gray skylight, hear nothing for just a short while, listen for myself returning. And this is the Alden piece. This is Omaha. There's a place in Omaha that Kevin talked about today at the corner of 24th and Lake. Where the music, there was a ballroom called the Carnation Ballroom. There was a record store called the A&A Music Company. It was all in this space. And my great friend Maureen Hunter, who was a terrific trumpet player, said that her mother said that she could go to the curb at Lake Street and 24th, but she couldn't cross. So that moment is what's in the poem. At 24th and Lake Street, Maureen music heralded the night. Joe Turner, Ruth Brown, the Drifters, Little Walter, and Otis Rush. All night long. Something caught there, the moment swaying. You are all at once aware of your breathing, its measured rise and fall. The streetcar tracks like a stream you cannot cross, should not cross. Overhead, the trolley wires spit out arcs of light. They linger in your eyes and bite your tongue. Red neon melts into the damp air, sputters and hums along. Sin like a chorus, one promise after another. Dixie Peach, hi-hat, and drumhead pulsing. Anyway, I spent a lifetime trying to get Dixie Peach, which is a pomade, into a poem, and hi-hat, the pedal operated cymbal. Anyway, I read a couple of new things and then give up. But I never like to do a reading without reading something new. This is a poem that begins with a quotation from Giuseppe Ungaretti. I usually do this in Italian, but this is from a wonderful translation by Jeffrey Block. And so I do that because it's a part of the poem. It's called All This While. And the quotation is, in lilac shadows. In lilac shadows, where among these losses, hunched figures, single file, gray dawn and soiled evening, do you find them, water droplets like gemstones, moments perfected from dread? I return as always to light and shadow, strains of familiar music, lyrics filled with love and absence. We are between wars, kneel into our own despairs. The wasp hovering here means only to find a brief rest. A lizard in silhouette nods once, then moves away. Branches shagged with ball moss catch the afternoon sun. Intensity is, as always, the space between singular and plural. The lists, not lists even, mere numbers of the dead, the nightbug tick of infusion, the huff of intubation. We wait, imagining each breath might bring our own virus. Numbers, once again, how many breaths remain before your number's up? Take that, Buster, of final darkness without a dawn. Stare, then, at what is close, what shines in the moment, its movement slight and accidental. I wish I may, heartsick, I wish I might, nod once, hover through sun and shade. The lilac blooms in memory, not in the dooryard, but at the kitchen door. spring, all those other springs, and loss, the sum that age contends with, particulate and strange. Well, a lot of this stuff in the last few years has been influenced by the pandemic. This is, I don't want to end on a downer, but this is one of them. And John Matthias, the great American poet John Matthias's wife, Diana, who was absolutely dazzling, died of COVID already at a nursing home. And this poem is called Your Fancy and Your Sight for Diana Matthias. She ran an educational program at the Snide Museum at Notre Dame, which is kind of referred to here. Only nothing increases, as though an area of darkness grew daily and we stood at its edges, reasoning something like fate. Our impending losses, death, disease, all that our fears propose to us, cursed end and heavy chance. Wish no more. They have counted 50 Empire State asteroids hurtling toward us, sure obliteration blazing through the night sky. And yet you walk through my dreams dressed in pastels, your hair somewhat carelessly pulled back, a Chinese painting in black and white behind you. Grace arrives as needed, violet and sage, your death, ours not that far behind. Is it more than mere duration, time's apparent simplicity, beginning to end, the first cry fervent and demanding, the last a catch in the throat or a sigh? Still, all that you have seen has its own rich moment, moments woven, things the eye's dreaming shuttle weaves together in sleep, gardens, rivers, streams. Where does it all go, all that subtly? The fancy that's made of sight, or fancy giving its own intricate shapes to sight. Who will play Actaeon? Who Diana did disguise, wander in tree shade to his own ending and its ironies? There is a figure that recurs in Corot, a young woman reading, once leaning against a tree. She is not so much a part of the scene as its maker. All that the book at her reading propose, a classical nude, her hair tended by a fully clothed servant, Diana once again. These are the measures destined for us, things imagined and reimagined. Bright chants or chances, unrelenting archaic songs, their creatures manifest, dear heart, tracing with us the known world's possibility. How and why is it sweet, the owl of Suffolk? Or Hesper's smooth, qualities acquiring substance rather than the other way around. We make way through memory's passages, line by line, color by color. Is that enough? Yeah. Thank you. So we got Finkelstein, O'Leary. This is, I should have done something Gnostic while I was here. Ooh, my knees are going. Wonderful. Thank you.
What are you suggesting now, Mr. Scroggins?
Oh, I thought you had some like afterwards. No? Or tip your bartender?
Tip your well, we've got the room for at least 2 more hours, so I believe there are other people who like to read things.
So how do we patch my Spotify into this?
Yeah, that's the question. How do we patch Scroggins' Spotify into this?